want to sit in the front row. You won't bite. All right, everybody. Is there anybody else outside? We're gonna go ahead and get started now. Wait a little bit longer. You stragglers in the back. Okay, I think that's everybody. All right. Thank you for raising your hand. All right, so I think I see a couple of new faces here today. So if this is your first time here at FutureWard, can you raise your hand? Wow, it's like a couple of newcomers. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to FutureWard Central and welcome to FutureWard Forum. For those of you who haven't been here before, if it's your first time at FutureWord Forum, it's basically an event that we have every month, and we actually prefer to call it more of a platform where you share knowledge. So if there's anybody out there today that feels like that they have something that they would like to share with the community, it could be an experience or anything, you can come and feel free to come and talk to me after the talk, and we can talk about how when to have you come and speak to the community. So we have a very, very, very special guest for tonight. He has quite the impressive resume, and I'm sure that you guys have all read up about him on our Facebook page. He's worked for the Obama administration, he's worked for the U.S. Department of Health, and right now he is a senior advisor for Planned Parenthood. So, but today he is here to talk to you about how storytelling can help your startup grow. So please join me and welcome Mr. Tait.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thanks, Jonathan, for hosting me. I'm talking a little bit about my career experience, and then I'll get into the presentation about storytelling. Everyone can hear me okay? First off, I'm a first-generation Chinese American, and so my parents grew up here. I still have lots of relatives here. My parents are in Michigan now. So I moved back here as visiting relatives. But it's sort of interesting to see what FutureWard is doing here and to see the collection of you all coming here. I've spent most of my career in political communications. My first job was working for Al Gore when he was running for president, which is back in 1999, which is quite a while ago, both in terms of communications and technology and in real world terms. This is before YouTube, before Twitter, before the iPhone, and that all of those tools have changed communications quite a bit. Then I spent quite a bit of time crisscrossing the country working on various political campaigns and moving up the communications ladder, working for gubernatorial candidates, presidential candidates, in New Hampshire, Kentucky. But all the while, I think understanding that how to get your message out, how to deliver a message, and how to persuade people. And fast forward to 2007, and I started working for Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, for many of you know, is a nonprofit organization in the United States that provides women's health care, but is also a political entity. And this is where Planned Parenthood is an interesting organization in that in the communications field they wear two hats. One hat is a medical provider, a healthcare provider, and so in lots of communities across the country, across the U.S., they are seen as a trusted healthcare provider and a trusted source of medical information. They're also seen as a political advocacy organization, and so the political opponents will attack Planned Parenthood. But they'll tackle them on the political terms. But Planned Parenthood, then, when they wear a political advocacy hat, they speak in political terms. So it's somewhat unique in terms of advocacy groups where they wear a provider hat as well as an advocacy hat. And in terms of Planned Parenthood, the work there has been in the last 8 months or so, have been in the news quite a bit because of conservative efforts that want to defund Planned Parenthood. And so there is a lot of communications efforts going on, responding and pushing back, and also getting out the message of the harm and impact that would be to defunding Planned Parenthood. And then in 2012, I spent time working for the Obama administration. I was an appointee in the Department of Health and Human Services. So I was working on issues ranging from Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, foodborne illness, disease outbreaks like Ebola. In my role, because under the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, and the National Institutes of Health are all part of NIH. So I was working with all of those communications operations and making sure that their messaging and their communications was in line with the Secretary of HHS's messaging and their strategies. And I think I would describe that it's pretty important work, but 75% of the communications work is fairly routine. I mean, the CDC has their own communication staff, the FDA has their own communication staff, NIH does as well, and so they are doing a lot of the work. 70% of that work is pretty routine, and where what the work I was doing was in the rest of it, the 25%, where half of that is positive news that you want to amplify and get out in a strong way, and the other half is crisis communication that you want to manage, whether it's a foodborne illness or something like Ebola, where you want to be very strategic about how you are communicating to the public. And making sure that the key messages of what the public should be doing and how the public should be responding get out across as many channels as possible. And then after Trump was inaugurated, I went back over to Planned Parenthood over the last 8-9 months or so, and working on pushing back and responding to the political attacks. So that's sort of my background and experience in a quick version. What I like to think about is there are lots of similarities between working in a startup and working for a political campaign. I think the number one is trying to get attention, the attention of the public, the attention of the media, or the attention, in case of startups, of investors. So this is where I think we can start talking a little bit about how storytelling can help your startup grow. There is a Native American proverb, tell me a fact and I'll learn, tell me a truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and you'll live in my heart forever. You all, or those of you who are working in startups, all have probably the communication strategy, which deals with press releases and social media and marketing. But how many startups have a storytelling strategy, and what is storytelling? Storytelling is a strategy to cut through and get attention in a very competitive market. There are a handful of universal stories. The underdog battling the giant, with Star Wars, or a lot of other examples. The hero goes on a journey in search of answers. That's Lord of the Rings, and again, other examples. The band of misfits working together, and then the love story. This is purposely simplistic, but just to show you that the basic story structure helps you understand how the startup can fit into a storytelling. In the storytelling, there are 3 components. The hero protagonist, which can be you, the founder, the company as a whole, the product, or even the customers. What gives a story its emotional weight is the conflict and the obstacle. And the resolution is what makes it memorable. But remember, the resolution is not an ending. Storytelling, in other words, is the hero overcoming conflict and obstacles. The benefits of storytelling is emotional. People respond to emotion. Telling a story puts you or your company at the center of attention. And people remember stories, people react and engage with stories, and people retell stories. What helps to understand storytelling is the contrast between what storytelling is and what storytelling isn't. Storytelling is the characters, not statistics. Storytelling is narrative and not timeline. Storytelling is emotion and not facts. And storytelling is visual, not text. I think many startups will default to an origin story, how you began. But I think what you want to do is think bigger than an origin story. You want to think about how what you are doing fits into the broader context of a love story, a journey, or a battle against a larger foe. So the classic example of battling a larger foe is the TV commercial from the mid '80s where this is Apple. This is Apple's TV commercial introducing the Macintosh, and this is them battling the larger foe. Now, Apple is now the big foe, but this is a way for them to set the context and saying, we are battling a larger foe, and we are the upstart company or the upstart product battling a larger foe. Many startups, I think, will have this mindset or this mentality because the startup is trying to and is going after either a larger brand, a bigger problem, or a bigger issue. So it helps to contrast what you are doing as a startup with a larger foe or a larger brand. This is a little infographic from Slack. Slack is a messaging app. This is a good example of how Slack is communicating their story in terms of a visual image. And they are talking about how their tools helped put robots on Mars. Basically, this is just one sentence, but it's a compelling image, and it's not a statistic, and it's not really an essay, but it's a compelling image of how their tool, how their product helps teams communicate and achieve goals. And this is the last slide. This is the Taiwanese company Gogoro, which is creating electric scooters. Gogoro here is using their customer stories. Now, a lot of, I think, startups can use customer stories, but they're using the customer stories to convey the uniqueness of their product and to put their customers at the center as the hero of their stories. So this is the other tactic or the other tool in how storytelling can help you grab attention, convey the brand uniqueness across the larger spectrum. The interesting thing about storytelling is it is as much of a sort of mentality and mindset, thinking about how you communicate as it is just as a strategy. You should not think about storytelling as just, we're going to tell a story today, but this is how we communicate to the public. Thinking about yourself, the company or the product or the customer in narrative terms and not in statistics or not in product terms. And so the notion of storytelling helping your startup grow is a sort of deliberate strategy to think about, in addition to how you are adding users or adding customers, the notion of being very deliberate about what is our story, what is our place in the larger narrative of where we want the public to think about what we're doing. And the storytelling in this day and age, you can use storytelling with social media, and Instagram, and Twitter. Anybody with a Twitter account can be a storyteller. And so the notion of getting as many users as possible. The notion of using social media to tell your story is as important as using other media, the TV media, the news media. If you are thinking of yourself as a storyteller, then you are thinking about how we shape the images that our public sees, how the narrative that the public sees about what we are doing. And you are using both the storytelling in your interaction with the public through social media, in your interaction with the traditional media, and the interaction with customers. The notion of storytelling then is not just what are our customer stories, but what is the story we want to tell from the customer, our point of view as a founder, or our point of view as the product. The storytelling is carries a lot more emotion and weight than just sort of talking about the product and what the product does. Let me open it up for some questions if folks have any questions.
Any questions?
Yes.
Well, you can tell a story, but you're not really in control of the story.
So the question is, you're not really in control of the story. Well, I think that you have some control over the story, especially from the channel that you own, the social media channel that you have. You're certainly in control of the story, and you're in control of the material that you present and push out. But it's true that there are external forces that will impact your ability to tell the story.
So are stories better suited for certain types of marketing materials versus the others? Because I believe, there are still customers out there who want to learn about features, learn about facts. How do you balance that? Or are there better, certain material that is better suited for stories?
So the question is, are there certain materials better suited for storytelling versus facts and statistics? Yes. So I think that the storytelling, which is this notion of characters, conflict, and resolution, is a long-term strategy and a communication strategy. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have lots of materials about statistics, user functionality, and the basic facts. But I think overall, if your strategy is to tell the story to communicate through storytelling, the statistical information is a bonus or is an add-on. People don't remember. Think of that as a tool. People don't remember very well statistics, but they'll remember a short video, or they'll remember a short narrative. And I also think that in terms of investors and the other audiences you're dealing with, that makes a difference too. I think the broad public cares about stories. Investors probably care mostly about numbers. And so in that sense, that's a different tactic or different strategy. But I think if you think about, the other thing I think that is helpful to remember is most of the companies that we know, that they're household names, the brands that we have today, those stories are pretty well ingrained. So you can sort of learn lessons from them, but it's not really that helpful to say, oh, the story of Apple, how can we become the story of Apple? How can we become the story of Google? I think it is sort of more interesting to look at the stories from a startup perspective. It is probably more helpful to look at the stories of how small startups that are not household names position themselves and think about themselves, whether it's in Taiwan or the US or other parts of the world, how they position themselves through a story lens. So that's why I think it's hard to say, look at specific examples of small startups and say what they are doing will work, because it's hard to know if they will work or not. But it has worked for entities like Apple and Slack.
Where do you draw the line between truth, romancing, and just being lying?
Where do you draw the line between truth, romantic, and plain lying?
Your romancing and story.
Romantic, yes. I think if so, storytelling has to be grounded in some facts and truth. If there are lots of examples of sort of a story being undermined because it's not factually correct, or because it's based on a lie. So I think that from the beginning, you should have the story you want to tell, the story that you are telling is grounded in facts. But I also think this is the question that you bring up is sort of related to an origin story. And sort of an origin story is how something began. The company began in a garage, and these two guys had an idea. These two people had an idea. And then from there, they built the most brilliant product. Now, the fact is that it wasn't a garage, but it was a lab, and it was 5 people instead of 2 people. That's probably not that big of a deal. But that's an origin story that I think is a little bit different than storytelling as we're talking about here with carrot, with hero, conflict, and resolution. In this notion of storytelling with hero, conflict, and resolution, I think you want it to be less about an origin story and more fitting into some of these classic stories, whether it's a hero on a journey, whether it's a hero battling a larger enemy, whether it's a love story, which for startup purposes, I think the love story is a little bit of a stretch. But you can think of a love story as either 2 entities or 2 products sort of having an obstacle of trying to get together, coming together to make a larger union, having an obstacle but then overcoming that obstacle, or if it's 2 companies coming together. But that is the sort of storytelling under these terms of storytelling helping startups grow. So in that sense, I think you are less likely to be caught in a lie because you're not, the storytelling there is forward-looking, more so than it is backwards-looking. Yes?
When you're trying to raise awareness for your startup, how pushy can you be in your storytelling? Because the reflex of any entrepreneur is putting his name forward, putting his value proposition forward. So how pushy can you be, or should you just be telling your story and then just putting your logo at the end of a video or an article? How pushy can you be in these kind of situations? And is it a mistake that we actually make?
So the question is, how pushy can you be in telling your story? I think, again, this notion of storytelling isn't about how pushy or how aggressive it is, but it is about putting or framing either yourself or your product or your company or your customers even in the context of a classic story. So I think that it is, so in that sense, it is not a concern about how pushy you are. You should put the product or you put the hero in the story should be very tight and concise with the hero, conflict, and resolution. In terms of how pushy you want to push that message out, I think most communications people will tell you in this day and age, it takes between 10 and 15 impressions before someone remembers your story. So if you want to say how often should you push out your story or push it out? You should repeat it over and over and over. If the question is in terms of an interview you're doing or a video you're promoting, the story, the classic hero conflict resolution story should be pretty tight and concise. The longer it is, the more involved it is, I think it is easier to lose attention. Yes.
And do you recommend the hero to be the company or the entrepreneur?
The question is the hero the entrepreneur or the company?
Or the product, actually.
Or the product? I think it very much depends on the specific entity. I think lots of companies will make the hero the customer. And so a basic story is the customer is facing big challenges. We fix this challenge for the customer, so therefore the customer is the hero. But in the Apple example, I think they're really the product, the Mac, and the company is really the hero because they are shattering and breaking free people from the handcuffs of the PC. So it very much depends. And I think it's also not necessarily just one story. A company could have 5 or 6 different stories. And so one story can be the founder is the hero and the conflict is not having any funding. And here's what the founder did to resolve the conflict. The second story, same company, can be the company is the hero. The conflict is I couldn't get a cab. And then so the resolution is something like Uber. And the third story is the same company, Uber. The conflict is, or the obstacle is the taxi companies. That's the giant that they're trying to battle, and the resolution is with the companies right now. So I think it does matter. It does matter with the company. It does matter, but it can be all those different things. But I think you want to again sort of think about storytelling is hero conflict resolution.
For your stories, how long should we make these stories? Gogoro is a sentence. Is like 2 paragraphs too long?
So the question is how long to make the stories? I think length is a weird, length is a tough thing to quantify. I think if you, the Slack image, that's one image. So how long is that? So it can be, I think what you want, the metric should be how we want to make our story tight. And you want to have a hero, you want to have a conflict, you want to have a resolution. If that ends up being a picture, a 30-second video, a 5-minute video, or a 2-paragraph essay, all those are, I think, fine lengths. So it is less about think less in terms of the length and think more about having the elements of a compelling story and then the best way to convey that, whether through a visual aspect, a tweet, a short essay, a video. And then the video is the video of somebody who is sort of like talking to the camera, or is it a mash of images? So the length is something you want to think about and consider, but the metric should be along the lines of having the elements.
So, what are some ways to measure whether your story works for your goal? Like, because it's very qualitative. How do you know? And a lot of time, I think the impact will not show immediately. It's not going to bring revenue from your customers immediately. Then how do you make sure that the story actually is a good story that sticks to people's memory?
So the question is, how do you measure and make sure the story sticks? So I think this is a strategy. This is a long-term strategy. Is probably an overused word, but this is a long-term mindset of how to communicate. And so I think if you are thinking long-term, the measurement can be sort of public attitude or public sensibility of your company. I think you can measure also in terms of what do people think about your company from day one versus day or year after 360 days or after 2 years. I think this is not something that sort of yields results in a 1 or 2 or 3 month time frame, but it does. It will manifest itself in how you think about communicating what the company or the entity or the product does. So rather than just our product is a fancy widget, or our product is a new app that is Uber for umbrellas. You want to talk about the story aspect of it so that there is some sort of long-term staying power for the product or company. I do think that social media is probably a pretty good immediate short-term feedback loop of how are people responding. And so I think if you have some elements on social media that are getting positive response, that's a good way to test. But it is, I think, not a great thing to think of, not a great criteria to say this. We need to see immediate results from storytelling.
Any other questions?
What do you do when the competition tells stories about you and your company?
Question is, what do you do when competition tells stories about you?
Like a good example was Mac against PC, right?
Right, so Mac against PC. So again, I think I am just being pretty deliberate about saying that there's stories about you, or stories about the company, is whether it's articles or attacks or that's stories. Storytelling is this notion of hero, conflict, and resolution. And so it is hard for, it's probably unwise, but also hard for opponents or competitors to storytell about you, because then they are shining a spotlight on you under the rubric of hero, conflict, and resolution. So that's different than PC is saying, oh, the Mac doesn't work, or the PC folks saying the Mac is too slow. Those are critiques, and those are attacks, but it's not really storytelling about you. So I think the notion of storytelling about yourself, again, is a sort of a longer-term, broader strategy about how you can be memorable to a broad audience. And even then, you're not really necessarily talking about, you're not answering critiques or attacks. You are sort of embedding in people's minds, fitting what you are doing into sort of universal stories that people remember and relate to.
Any more questions? Anybody?
So in your experience, I opinions may be divided. Especially when you tell your story, the general viewpoint may be something very different. No matter how positive you want to be, they could be thinking something quite negative. So how do you try to combat these listener problems to really sell them on your story and why these are the right benefits to look at?
So the question is how to combat critiques.
Yeah, negative critique.
Negative critiques. I think I would say that the best way to combat critiques is one, you want to, in some way, I think combating critiques, from the company's perspective, the company's point of view, I think the best way is to be as specific as possible. If customers or competitors have critiques, the more specific you can respond and push back, the more precise you can push back and respond, the more likely people will understand and or believe it. Whether it's you do it on sort of a one-on-one social media forum or in the broad public or a newspaper article or a media article, the more specific and precise you are in responding, the more you want to be authentic and believable. And so to be authentic and believable, you want to be precise and specific. The corollary, though, is I think you want to be as positive as possible. And so in talking about your product, I think you want to, or in addressing critiques, you don't want to get stuck into the trap of repeating the negative or buying into the negative. And so you want to have sort of find this middle of addressing the critique as specific as possible in a positive way. I don't know, it's not a very good answer. Without sort of like in some ways this is hard, it's easier to talk about, or it's harder to talk about without a specific example. But I don't know if there's a specific example you want to bring up.
Yeah, I'll do it. So there's, companies are using AI, and AI is known to be the quote-unquote job killer in terms of 1,000 news articles. And when you are in the industry, you know that that's not the case. But it's hard to discuss this with somebody when they tell you this is going to be the future food, is that nobody will have a job and you're going to destroy the planet. So that's the problem.
So the specific question is around AI and how to combat critiques about AI.
Yeah.
There is probably a difference between you talking about AI with friends or at a bar or something like that versus the overall industry or the company talking about the benefits or talking about the positives of the company or the AI industry. I think in the broad communications sense, I think to the extent that you can, the critiques are not really about facts and data. The critiques are about emotion. The critiques are about the fear of the unknown and unknown things. And so it is probably not that effective to respond with stats, statistics, and facts. It is I think I would suggest one of the responses is around understanding where folks' fears are, and talking about what the potential benefits are, but understanding, meeting them halfway with the notion of here is where the fears are coming from are rooted in whether it's other media or speculation, but being able to say, I hear you, but here's why I'm doing what I'm doing, or here's why the company's doing what it's doing, and here are the benefits. And I think it is helpful to point to specific incidents, recent incidents of the fear is rooted in stuff that hasn't happened yet. And so I think if you can point to specific things that have happened that have been beneficial, that helps people, or that helps the message, that helps strengthen your message, that this is a tangible, real thing here, as opposed to some unknown speculative thing 3 years down the line.
Any last questions? Last chance.
This is the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would just like to see more examples actually of people telling stories to sell a message. But I guess one question that could be asked is like, I remember I heard a quote that managers use stories to like inspire their employees. So I was wondering if you know a specific example or good comment of how would they actually go about doing it, or maybe, yeah.
So it's thoughts and examples about managers using stories to inspire their employees.
Yeah.
I think that a specific example does not come to mind, but it is, I think, in the same vein as this notion of people remember stories, and storytelling is emotional. And so for a manager to communicate to their employees in emotional terms and in sort of larger scope of things is more effective than saying we need to meet this numeric goal, or we need to meet this specific deadline. The power of storytelling holds true both in the manager sense of inspiring employees or leading a team, as it does with communicating to the broader public about the work that you're doing.
Two questions. What is your name, and what time is dinner?
So my name is Tait Sai. That's S-Y-E. And I think dinner is right now.
Stephanie? I just want to ask, like for you yourself, what's your favorite sort of like story? Maybe like sort of company story that really like that you like, and your favorite one that you can share with us.
The question is favorite story regarding a company.
Yeah, something that resonates with you.
stories that resonate. People familiar with Blue Bottle Coffee? The Blue Bottle Coffee is a coffee store in San Francisco that is growing, I think, pretty rapidly now. But they have, it started in San Francisco maybe 15 or 18 years ago. And then since then, there are branches in, I think, LA, Tokyo, I'm not sure if New York, probably New York. But the guy who started it is just a coffee enthusiast, but he wasn't, and didn't know a lot about the coffee business. And he started the first coffee store in like a very small little shop in San Francisco. And I think he's a musician. If I remember, he's a musician by training. But he, his idea was to roast and then serve coffee within 24 hours. Roast the coffee within 24 hours. Serve coffee that's roasted within 24 hours. So pretty quickly and pretty fresh. If I remember correctly, his first idea was really just was delivering the roasted beans, not serving brewed coffee. But then I think that didn't prove to be that manageable, and then he gets into serving coffee. But I think what's interesting about the story is really it's focusing, he had a pretty sharp and narrow focus around serving and brewing coffee, pretty fresh coffee, and sticks to that for 15 or maybe 12 years before it sort of starts to grow pretty widely. And then Nestle bought it, I don't know, earlier this year or last year. But I think his notion, he talks about how he was not looking to build a national coffee shop. He was looking to brew and serve fresh coffee and do it well, and then from there it just grows and grows and grows. So I think his ambition was quality in a local store, and then because it caught on, it grows and grows and grows. That's what sort of comes to mind.
Can you provide like a high-level framework to build a story? Because you mentioned about the component, right? But is that the first step to figure out who should be the hero in the story, or should we figure out the goal of the story first, and then we progress, we figure out the format? How do you actually what are some general steps to form a story that you want to tell your audience?
So the question is general steps to form a story. I think the first step is thinking about what universal story you fit in. If it is the sort of underdog going after the giant, is it a sort of either love story or a partner story? Is it a journey story? Are you on a quest or a journey? So that's the first step. And again, remember, like you could tell the same company or the same product can tell multiple stories. But that's figuring out where do we fit into one of these larger universal stories? Because that way, once you understand that, then the different elements come into place. What is the journey? Is the journey from trying to build a better PC, trying to build a better cell phone, trying to fix energy issues, or is it the underdog going to the giant? I mean, we want to beat Google, we want to have a better iPhone, or we want to launch a rocket to space. So it matters sort of universal story you fit into. And then I think the next step is figuring out what the hero is. And again, the hero isn't always going to be the company. The hero is basically the center of action. And the conflict is generally pretty easy. The conflict is easy to identify. And then the resolution is not the ending. The resolution is how the conflict is addressed. And so sometimes it is we fix this. Sometimes it is we have a new product. And sometimes it is we are just getting started on fixing this issue.
So I guess you kind of decide like the format of the story, like whether it's a video, it's like text, after you have the general idea of how you want to tell it, right?
Yeah, I think the story, the format, those are all, the story should be told in all of different formats. So you should not just tell one story on YouTube and a different story on Twitter. But you should use all different channels and formats to tell the story.
Okay, thank you so much for all the questions. Let's give another round of applause to Tait. So this is our event tonight. We have some pizza outside. Unfortunately, not everybody will get some pizza because only 30 people confirmed on Facebook and there are at least 50 people here. So we have another event next month, so please, if you guys are going to come, make sure you are speaking on Facebook so we have an accurate head count. Everybody can get pizza. So thank you again for coming tonight, everybody. Have a good evening.